Good morning to each of you, and thank you for coming. This morning's already been eventful. I got a call saying that I had won a Bahamian cruise, and I hung up on them. And then the next call was someone who's using the Mercy Year very well. And I, thinking it was Tony Shaughnessy, listened, but no, it was someone wanting a donation for the veterans, but they were using the Mercy Year as their entrance into it, so I thought, they're clever. This morning we have Father Pat Reynolds with us, and it would be a lot easier just to say that Father Pat was born, educated, ordained, and is. But instead, I will tell you that he was born to Mary Patrice Nuns Reynolds and Kentucky Supreme Court Justice Charles Reynolds. He is one of 11 children. He was educated at Erlanger, Kentucky, Emmitsburg, Maryland, and Washington, D.C. He was ordained January the 12th, 1980, here in Owensboro by Bishop Seneker. He's been associate pastors, principal. He did postgraduate studies. He was in the tribunal. He was a tribunal judge. He was the judicial vicar, and he's presently the vicar general of the diocese. One of the just added little things that I want to say. Father Pat was pastor in Hardinsburg, and I had a very good friend there, Corinne Teef, who was dying. The daughter, Anna Mary, said to me, you know, I don't know why Mom can't die. She always says to me, Annie Mary, little Anna Mary, who's going to take care of you? So I said to her, the next time she says that to you, you say, Father Pat Reynolds will. And she died 30 minutes after she had said that to her.
Wow.
So Father Pat.
Anna Mary got married not too long after that, so somebody else was able to take care of her. And she's very happy now. Thank you, Sister. It's a pleasure to be here with you all today. And I know you have a theme this month of looking at this Holy Year of Mercy from different aspects, from different speakers. So I guess I'm the first, is that right?
You are.
Okay, so I'm just kind of breaking you all in for better talks, 3 better talks that are coming your way. But today I wanted to talk about the Holy Year door. You know, that always begins the Holy Year when the Pope knocks on that big door at St. Peter's. And it's the gateway of mercy. I'd like to maybe look at some scriptures that talk about the importance of doorways or gateways, a little bit about architecture. I want to talk about the Holy Year door at St. Peter's itself, and I've got some things I will pass out to you that we can sort of look at together and do some reflection on the role of Christ as our Savior and how entering that doorway is a sign of God's mercy. Anyway, as I mentioned, there are many passages in scriptures that depict the door or the gateway as having special symbolic nature to the presence of God. And after the fall of Adam and Eve, we've traditionally heard and we have traditionally taught our young ones in symbolic language that the gates of paradise were closed. You taught that to your kids. A mighty angel, one of the traditional 7 archangels, was placed there guarding the gate with a fiery sword, not allowing Adam and Eve to return because of their sin. Tradition calls that angel Uriel. which means the light of God. Some traditions name Uriel as the angel who checked the doorways of the homes of Egypt to see if they were signed with the blood of the Lamb. In an apocryphal gospel, Uriel plays a role in the rescue of John the Baptist from Herod's massacre of the innocents and transports John and Elizabeth to join the Holy Family after their flight into Egypt. Leonardo da Vinci pictures that scene in a painting he did called Virgin of the Rocks. And I found it interesting when I visited one time at Nazareth, Kentucky, at St. Vincent Chapel at the Mother House. There are 4 windows in that bell tower showing the 4 archangels, Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, and Uriel. Uriel hasn't really been part of our tradition, but as I said, in some quarters it has been. Many stories regarding doors in the Bible. As mentioned before, only the households where the door lintels were sprinkled with the blood of the Lamb prevented that angel of death from entering. It is at the doorways or gateways that one encounters the Holy One. For example, in Solomon's temple in Jerusalem, there was a 2-leaf door between it and the Holy of Holies, and it was overlaid with gold, and that's described in 2 Chronicles chapter 4. Also present was a veil of blue and purple and crimson and fine linen. There were no windows into that Holy of Holies, but it was considered the dwelling place of the Lord, those golden doors that entered. In the Gospels, the entire town of Capernaum came to the doorway at Peter's house for healing when they learned that Jesus was there. Remember, Jesus had cured Peter's mother-in-law. And some of my ironic friends would say that that's why Peter denied Jesus 3 times, because he healed his mother-in-law. I don't think that's true at all. But anyway, as soon as they heard about it, before we had messaging and texting and tweetering and all that, word spread pretty quickly, and they came there to be healed. At the gates of the city of Nain in Luke 7, Jesus meets the funeral procession of the only son of a widow, bringing him back to life and restoring him to his mother at the gates of the city there. On Ash Wednesday, we read from St. Matthew that we are to shut the door of our room and thus enter into the presence of God with our prayer where no one else can see us. One story Jesus told has a man banging on the door to receive help from his neighbor. He says, "Go away, my kids are asleep." But he keeps banging in order that he can be hospitable to his guests and perform that work of mercy. In Matthew 7:13, Jesus says we all must pass through the narrow gate if we are to attain the kingdom. Every time that gospel comes up on Sunday Mass, once every 3 years, I always like to talk about Fat Man's Misery, Mammoth Cave, if you've ever gone through, and how when I was little, I used to pretend like it was so hard to squeeze through. Now it is kind of hard to squeeze through. Jesus tells a story about the 5 virgins who were unprepared and were locked out of the wedding feast on the wrong side of the gate because they were not prepared and they were not vigilant. In John 10, which we'll hear in a couple of weeks, stories about the Good Shepherd. Besides saying that he is the Good Shepherd, he also says, "And I am the sheep gate." So with Christ himself as the gate, the sheep need pass under his staff, and that's what the shepherd would do. And he would take that time to inspect them, put balm or ointment on them if they were cut or bruised, and they knew that there was safety as long as they were coming in where their shepherd was, coming in through him as the gate. In Revelation 3:20, the voice of Jesus declares, "Behold, I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come to him and will dine with him and he with me." One of the greatest sources of intimacy, of having that meal together. And of course, the lovely description of the gates that lead into the New Jerusalem, I will talk about in my closing remarks today. The inscriptions above church doors and carvings on many church doors announce the holiness of the place and welcome the worshiper. I remember when I was doing a sabbatical in Ireland a number of years ago, I went to the church of St. Bridget in Kildare, and the doorways were modern, but they had these bronze hands that came out of the doorway, and it was almost a welcoming, come in to this holy place. Probably one of the most famous architectural constructions with special doors is that baptistry in Florence. Some of you probably have seen that. The south doors of that famous baptistry, San Giovanni, consist of 28 quatrefoil panels. That's the south door. There's a number of doors there, with the 20 top panels depicting scenes from the life of St. John the Baptist, which is the name of that particular chapter. 8 lower panels depict the 8 virtues, 3 theological virtues: faith, hope, and charity. Humility gets thrown in there too. And then the 4 cardinal virtues: fortitude, temperance, justice, and prudence. And the north door is by Ghiberti, who's pretty famous as a bronze sculptor. And those bronze panels include 28 different scenes, 20 panels of life from Jesus in the New Testament, and the 8 lower panels show the 4 evangelists, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and the 4 Western fathers of the church, Ambrose, Jerome, Gregory, and St. Augustine. So artwork often taught the scriptures and church history to many who were unlettered, those who could not read. An early period of church history included the order of penitents. Some have suggested that perhaps we need to restore that. But because of the public sinfulness of these people, they were excluded from the community. And to be restored, they had to do penance, sometimes days, months, and even years. And they would stand by the doorways of the church and not allowed in. And I think it was Holy Thursday usually when they were finally readmitted to the community, so they would come through the church doors, once again being part of that body of Christ. There are several notable inscriptions above famous church doors. The Church of St. George in Milan has this written. It's kind of beautiful. I am the door to life. Everyone must enter. All those searching for the joys of heaven must enter through me. May the one who was born from the Virgin, not from man, save everyone who enters, sustain those who return. And I think probably one of the most famous inscriptions is above the door to the Basilica of St. John Lateran in Rome, which is the Pope's cathedral as the Bishop of Rome. It reads, Mater et caput omnium ecclesiarum urbis et orbis, the mother and head of all the churches in the city and the world. And we usually proclaim that every year in November when we celebrate the dedication of St. John Lateran. It is the Pope's cathedral. A little bit about the Holy Year in itself and the history of the Holy Year, the so-called Jubilee Year. We find the beginning of the Holy Year with Pope Boniface VIII, way back in 1300. The first Pope to declare a Jubilee year, and he had succeeded Pope St. Celestine V. He had abdicated the papal throne in 1294, the Pope who abdicated historically before Benedict XVI. They referred to him a lot when Benedict resigned. But in December of 1299, rumors had swept Rome that a great indulgence would be obtained by all Christians who would visit the Basilica of St. Peter in the first year of the new century. To be honest, that was kind of news to Boniface VIII, but a great number of foreigners had come to Rome and they shared that same belief. In January 1300, Pope Boniface happened to meet an old man from Savoy. He was 107 years old. I've always said that an old person is someone who's 10 years older than my present age. So to all of you, this would be a really old man. You know, he was 107. But he remembered coming to Rome as a young boy with his father at the beginning of the previous century. And he said his father had journeyed to Rome in the year 1200 to receive the indulgence which was offered every 100 years. And the man bade his son, he said, should you live so long, come back at the beginning of the next century and receive that same favor by visiting the tomb of the Prince of the Apostles. And there were also 2 aged pilgrims from France who confirmed that same tradition. So Boniface consulted with his cardinals and then issued that papal bull, Antiquorum, on the 22nd of February in the year 1300. So he granted for that year, 1300, and for every 100 to all those who, being truly contrite, should confess their sins and visit the 2 Roman churches of Saints Peter and St. Paul, at least once a day for 30 days if they lived in Rome, and if they were pilgrims for 15 days. Previously, those indulgences had been granted only on exceptional occasions. But with Pope Boniface, the Holy Year plenary indulgence became part and parcel of Jubilee celebrations. And it's said that in the year 1300, that first Jubilee year, Holy Year, there were continually over 200,000 pilgrims in Rome at any one time. So we think of, the lack of transportation they had in those days, but the role of pilgrim and, pilgrimages were encouraged, and sometimes when a pilgrim left, people never knew if they would see their loved one again. But it was also a sign or symbol of that trek of life. The word Jubilee did not appear in Boniface's writing, that papal bull. But, we have since made that comparison with that Jewish year of Jubilee. And the word actually comes from the Hebrew. The first pope to use the word officially as Jubilee year was Clement VI, and that was at the second Jubilee. So the first 2 centuries of the celebration of Jubilee years, the emphasis was on visiting the tombs of the apostles. And of course, all those other things, the indulgence could be obtained by confession and prayers for the Holy Father, all those things that you have taught people over the years. The use of a holy door seems to have begun in 1423, which was the 5th Jubilee. And you're saying, okay, if Boniface said it's supposed to be every 100 years, then how does 1423 figure into that? Well, they decided, people don't live so long, and so we need to make it a little bit sooner. So there was the next one in 1350, and then they decided that, well, there should be one a little bit closer than that. There's some people who won't live to be 50 for the next one. So it was in 1390. And then there was this whole thing about, well, maybe every 33 years because that was the life of Jesus. So that's why 1423 gets thrown into one. And then finally they go back to 1450, and then it's eventually becomes every 25 years. But 1423 was Pope Martin V, and he was the first pope after the Great Schism, and there were 3 different popes, and Christianity was just torn to pieces. So he was elected in Constance, and was a pretty good guy. I mean, he was considered to be a jovial fellow and bright, and he came to Rome, which was in shambles, really. The churches, there were roofs at St. Peter's and St. John Lateran that were broken through and windows broken. And so he decided that we need to do some revision and some rebuilding. So he began, and it continued long after his death into that whole Renaissance area when the churches became a little bit more gilded. But it was at St. John Lateran, his cathedral, in which they had the Holy Door. He also called it the Golden Door, Pope Martin did. Pope Alexander VI, and that's in 1500, he opened the Holy Door on Christmas of 1499. So traditionally it began at Christmas, and that began the Holy Year. And usually the tradition was from Christmas Eve of the year until the Epiphany of the following year. So, a little over a year, like a year and a few weeks. That's the traditional Holy Years that come every 25 years. Now, we've also had some extraordinary holy years. For example, I think Pope Leo declared a holy year. He celebrated 1900, the beginning of the new century, but also I think on the occasion of his 50th anniversary as a priest. And it was originally just meant for the people in Rome, but then others were welcomed. Pope Pius XI did that too, back in the late 1920s. So actually, Pope Pius XI, some of you might remember him. He was a librarian. He was an archivist, and his name was Achille Ratti. He was a skier, but spent most of his days in the Vatican museums and knew where everything was. Didn't know where the bodies were buried, but knew where the books were buried, that's for sure, the manuscripts. Had also been a papal envoy to Poland, I think. But he had 3 holy years in his pontificate. 1925, which would have been the regular time to have it, then in 1933, and that was the 1900-year anniversary of the death of Jesus. So it was a holy year, an extraordinary holy year. And then you remember that Pope John Paul II in 1983 also declared that to be an extraordinary holy year. That was the 1950th anniversary. So throughout the history of the holy years, there are some extraordinary holy years that we find in there. The rite of opening the door in tradition, as I mentioned, it was Alexander VI in 1500 that started that on Christmas Eve, and then the Solemnity of Epiphany in 1501 is when it actually closed. I do have a framed picture. I'm attempting to have an exhibit of Holy Year memorabilia. I've just kind of collected stuff over the years, and I didn't know. Pope Francis didn't inform me he was going to call it Holy Year, you know. So I think it's a good time this year to maybe put some things on exhibit. But this is a print of the Pope. It says, "The Pope opening the Holy Gate, a grand ceremony of the Romish Church." So it's an English publication with a little bit of a snoot, you know, they're looking down their nose, calling it the Romish Church. And they also call it the Holy Gate. But we see the Pope, who is got a hammer in his hand. So it's not real heavy if y'all would just want to pass it around. That would be fine. But it's still got its pretty vibrant color for something that was published in 1748. Anyway, the ritual for opening the Holy Year door, the Vanis Creator Spiritus was sung. The Pope had a special prayer, and he took a hammer. So a hammer was part of that, of knocking on the door 3 times. I don't know if knocking on the Pope's skull 3 times when he's dead, if that comes from that or not. You know, they would call the Pope by his Christian name. I don't think they do that anymore. They still use that hammer. They sing the verses of a psalm. Masons would come to open the doors to the chanting of the Jubilate Deo. The Pope is the first to pass through the door, and the choir would sing the Te Deum, and the procession would move towards the altar for a celebration of Vespers. In past years, the relics of Veronica and of the Holy Lance, which are traditionally kept at St. Peter's, are publicly shown and venerated. Now, Pope Paul VI and John Paul II did some renovations of the ritual. But the Pope always kneels and always opens the door. But they would also brick it up, you know, or put mortar on it when the Holy Year was over, so it was only open those every 25 years. And so there was a special trowel that the Pope would use with mortar, and he would place the first couple of bricks at the end of the Holy Year to build the wall, and then the workers would do the same. And I think it was Pope Pius XI, the bishops of the world, gave him, I think it was a gold encrusted and pearl hammer, and the reliquary and the spade that he would use, or the instrument for the mortar. And this was an old postcard from Rome, and it's in Italian, so all you Italian speakers can look at that. We used to do things really ornate, remember, back in the old days. And one of my young priest friends is always attracted to, things that are kind of gold and shiny. And I say, you're just an old cuervo, that's a Spanish for crow. Crows like shiny things. And then you always have a piece of foil or tinsel or something in their nest. So I call him the old cuervo. He likes shiny things. Anyway, there's lots of details about the ceremony itself, and I won't go through that. You could probably find it online of watching Pope Francis go through that himself as he opened the Holy Year, and that began on the Feast of the Immaculate Conception. And it ends this year on the Feast of Christ the King. Pope Pius XI started the Feast of Christ the King, and I think he ended that extraordinary Holy Year of 1933 by declaring that feast. And I think in the old days is usually before I can remember, it came on the last Sunday of October. Does that ring a bell? Yeah. And then it was moved to end of November, closer to our Thanksgiving, but to end the liturgical year. So it's been shifted, but it was always at the end of October. But it was to close the Holy Year of 1933, the year of the anniversary of Christ's death, by lauding him and acclaiming him as King of the universe. So you've got the hammer and the trowel. There was a custom of placing some coins in the mortar when they would build up the wall again. Holy water, of course. The door at St. Peter's specifically was a wooden door that had been there since the mid 18th century, and it's kind of interesting that Benedict XIV, Prospero Lambertini, in 1748, he was a canon lawyer. That's how I know his name, but he established this special wooden door. But, by 200 years later, it was getting pretty weak. And so at the end of World War II, Bishop Francesco von Strang, who was a bishop in Switzerland, the Diocese of Basel-Lugano, he had made for Pope Pius XII these new bronze doors. It was a sign of the Swiss people's thankfulness to God that they were spared during the war. Switzerland was a neutral country, and the fact that they were spared the horrors of war. So Pope Pius XII blessed these two new doors and explained its iconography. He says, the bronze panels movingly praise the wonders of mercy practiced by God, who came to look for what had been lost. And I do have a panel. So he established that in 1950 that we put up. Here's one of 1975, Pope Paul VI, who's knocking on the holy door. And the Pope, after the knocking and the prayers, would push it open. And they didn't have like all the mortar on the other side out, and some of it fell on him. So that's one reason why I think John Paul did some restructuring of how things were going to be done. We learned from mistakes. He wasn't injured, but you can see the panels, and these are just two coins that show Boniface, the originator of the Holy Year, and then Paul VI. And then symbols of the different faiths of the world that he was welcoming all of them to. So as a result of Vatican II, Pope Paul VI welcomed, he broke down walls between many, many religions, as Vatican II did accomplish. And he was the first to meet with many leaders of other faiths. So it's a little bit heavier, but we'll still pass that on too. So a major aspect of celebrating the Holy Year for Catholics is a pilgrimage to Rome and the ritual passing over the threshold of the Holy Door to symbolize the passing into the presence of God. At the same time, remission of the temporal punishment for pilgrim sins is granted, known as an indulgence. And some of you are great advocates of indulgence. Some Catholics say, what is this whole thing about? But, if you think about it, sins are forgiven. But the effects of our sins spiral out. And, things that maybe I said in anger 25 years ago are still being replayed in somebody's mind that, I didn't know it. But what we do, and that's the importance, I think, of restitution, of making up for what we've done, of penance, and whether it's here on earth or here in the next life or whatever. But somehow it's the church's treasury of merits that help us to work through those things. And that conversion continually takes place too, as we take advantage of the sacrament, but just having a deeper prayer life with the Lord too. So going through that holy year door begins with a desire to make peace with God, to reconcile with neighbors, and to restore in oneself everything that has been damaged in the past and reshape our heart through conversion. This is, someone gave me this. This is a panel of the bronze holy year door. It's a miniature, obviously, of that in Rome. So I'm going to pass that around too. What I'd like to do now is pass around these lemon drops, just so that some of you can wake up. And I have some handouts that show the different panels and the scripture that goes with each. So if I could have maybe a helper or two, maybe that could help pass out some of these, would be great. Okay.
Yeah, this is the center door of St. Peter's. Have you got me that?
But it's only opened every 25 years, yeah.
So the other doors are several doors, I guess. I never been to St. Peter's.
Yeah. It is more to the side. In fact, I think it was a chapel to Mary originally that was behind that. And so in making it the Holy Year door a number of centuries ago, they had to remodel, and some of those things in Our Lady's Chapel, I think, ended up being in Florence. And you know how that is. When you remodel something, it just goes elsewhere. I want to just kind of briefly go through the panels on the door, and most of them are scriptural.
Thank you. If you'll see me.
Anybody else?
This one's St. Peter's.
Yeah, that's a copy of the Holy Year door at St. Peter's. There are also Holy Year doors at the other major basilicas of Rome, too. St. Mary Major's, St. John Lateran, and St. Paul outside the walls. And I think in 2000, Pope John Paul had ceremonies where he opened all those four doors. This year, I think Pope Francis maybe did two of them. But for those who can't go to Rome, that's why they established that every cathedral church could have Holy Year doors that people could go through, and also receive that indulgence, with the prayers and confessions and reception of communion, all within a period of, a couple of days of that. And then we also have, this is also a pilgrimage site too, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Let's look at the very first one. It's the angel at the gates of paradise. And the angel is holding that fiery sword. I said one tradition says that it's Uriel. We see the snake kind of wrapped around the tree of life. Mm-hmm. You see the animals and the birds taking off like crazy. So it seems to say that the angel is protecting the path leading to the tree of knowledge. The angel is extending his left arm, pointing the way out of paradise to Adam and Eve. So never again are they allowed back in. Even the animals seem to be fleeing in terror. From this moment on, it says that wild instincts will awaken in them, and they will no longer be man's friends, but always ready to unleash their fury on mankind. So that oneness that man had with God, who walked with God in the garden, at peace, the one who named all the animals of the earth. Beautiful language, but it says that estrangement that sin causes, the complete happiness enjoyed by our ancestors has been destroyed by sin. So it seems that God's spiritual friendship are a thing of the past. Look at the second panel, which is the fall. Quod heva tritis obstula, the joy that Eve took away. In the passage from Genesis 3, God expelling man and woman. There is a cloud above Adam, and that cloud is supposed to be a symbol of God's presence, that God hasn't abandoned mankind. But we see a look of anguish on Adam's face about losing paradise. His left hand is extended backwards, almost like shielding him from maybe God's wrath. The right hand is raised, maybe expressing hope and salvation. Eve seems to be hiding her face in shame, full of tears. It would be that we could say Eve is the cause of death, or at least she's to blame for that. We see the gate of paradise right behind them, so they're leaving, and that gate is in the past. Leaving it barefoot, walking on soil that has been cursed with brambles and thistles, and will yield food only through the sweat of their brow, as Genesis says. So original sin is in the first panel and the second panel. But there is a message like that right above the picture, that Latin phrase, the joy that Eve took away. And that phrase finishes by saying, is given back to us through your Son. So that was a hymn written by Venanzio Fortunato. He saw a connection between Mary and Eve. So a lot of spiritual writers have done that, made that connection with Mary, as calling her the new Eve. But Venanzio was one of the first to write that in a hymn. What else do I want to say about that particular panel? Oh, there's a quote from St. Ambrose. Ambrose says it's easier to excuse woman for original sin than man, because Eve was seduced by an angel, a fallen angel, and she repented more quickly and more generously. She accused the serpent. She didn't accuse Adam. But it was a woman who also made up for that first sin by giving birth to the Savior. So this is what Ambrose says. Come close, Eve, who are now called Mary. You give us an example of virginity and give us God, and you give us a God. This God visited just one woman, but welcomes them all. The third panel is Mary, we see in her Annunciation. We see a window behind her. We see a dove that is coming down, symbolic of the Spirit. There's a liturgical passage that reads, the joy that Eve took away is given back to us to your Son, and the path to the kingdom of heaven is opened. So the gates of heaven open and mankind heads toward salvation because of her yes and because of the incarnation. Of course, we just celebrated the Annunciation yesterday, which was moved because of the 25th being during Holy Week. Mary is wearing a mantle. She seems to be spiritually absorbed. Some 12th century and later representations of Mary have her kneeling, and also have the angel kneeling too, but they're not depicted this way in the panels. The angel calls Mary full of grace. And what does she refer to herself? As the Lord's handmaid, or the servant. So no one ever been called full of grace, which is one of the greatest titles one could have. But she just sees herself as the humble maidservant of the Lord. In the litany, the Blessed Virgin Mary, we call her Gate of Heaven, don't we? It's one of her many, many titles. So because of her yes, because of her deep humility, her faithfulness to God, she is the gate.
Another cat.
Yes.
There's a little cat. Yeah, I love that.
There is a little, yeah, and the fourth one, the angel, shows the little cat behind the curtain. So the artist was kind of playful. You have to admire artists like that. There's a painter by the name of, there were two brothers, Wysocki, but one of them, who goes by a nickname Herrero, I think, always puts a little black cat somewhere in his painting, sometimes hidden, but it's playful. Vito Consorti is the artist who did these panels, so he had a playful side to him. The angel is actually carrying a rose in panel 4. A lot of times you see an angel with a lily as a sign of purity, but usually there is some gift giving when an angel appears. And of course, we celebrate the Annunciation 3 times a day as we pray the Angelus. And how many times have we said the Hail Mary in our lives? Hundreds of thousands of times that we're acclaiming what the angel Gabriel said to Mary. Bernard of Clairvaux wrote this: "The flower was born from a flower in a flower." And by that he meant Jesus, being a flower, was born from a flower, Mary, in a flower, meaning Nazareth, because that was the time of year in which the blooms were coming, in March. Let's look at the 5th panel, and that's Christ's baptism. Tu venus ad me, you come to me. So John the Baptist is just kind of incredulous and couldn't believe that the person he recognized as the Messiah was coming to him. But Jesus says, you must do this. It is fitting. Jesus makes it clear that he's humbling himself in the rite of baptism to conform to God's will. So he sees himself with a destiny of service and sacrifice. Jesus is standing right there in the Jordan. We see the water flowing over his feet. And a lot of spiritual writers would say from that moment, and some of our liturgical prayers say that the waters of the earth were sanctified. So the waters of purification free us from original sin, our waters of baptism. And through that, Christ gives us back much more than we ever lost through Adam. In the Exultet, that phrase, "O happy Father, necessary sin of Adam, won for us so great a Redeemer." It's really beautiful. The fact that if the fault, the sin of Adam and Eve, but the happiness results from God who wanted to make up for that, and many times over through bringing us Jesus. The lost sheep is the 6th panel. Look at the shepherd's arms. They're extended almost like a cross, There he is reaching for the sheep that's way down in the brambles and caught, and he's hanging onto the cliff. So going to any extreme to rescue a lamb, a sheep that wandered off on its own, that became so self-centered, or we can continue to name our own faults, but when we wander, we're exactly like that lamb. And what was the context of telling that story? Remember in Luke, we've got those 3 stories of mercy right together. We've got the prodigal son, the lost sheep, and then the woman who's trying to find the coins. I always like to use that middle one, with the coins, we have first reconciliation with kiddos, because you can sweep and get them involved in it too. That's an aside that has nothing to do with anything, but anyway, the context was Jesus was having a meal with the tax collectors and sinners, and obviously people were looking at him rather awry because he was doing that. But he's just saying how much they need to be brought back home. So anyway, those arms of the shepherd are kind of beautiful in that they kind of welcome and extend, going to any extreme to welcome people back. He came to save what was lost.
I'm surprised that isn't more popular. Or at least first time I've seen it, I'm surprised that isn't more seen around, because it's such an expression of God's mercy.
It is. What awaits the returning sheep? In Ezekiel says, I myself shall pasture my sheep, I shall give them rest. And in 1 Peter, he talks about returning to the shepherd and the guardian of your souls. So great images for. And there's a little dog up at the top. Obviously, it was a watchdog, and he's kind of sniffing out the two little sheep that are still up there who haven't wandered down the ravine. Look at 7. We see the merciful father and the prodigal son. Some animals in that picture too. Looks like a dog that's jumping up. There's a horse in the background. But of course, we've heard the story of the prodigal son so many times. But I think Pope Francis really wants us to look at the mercy of the Father, who let his son take his money and go off. He had free will, which is what we have too. And the father, probably knowing, most parents know their children pretty well, knew what he was going to do, and yet he's there waiting for him to come to his senses. And that's really what people have to do. They just need to come to their senses. And sometimes it's our job. Our sins are too big for anyone to forgive. And I think that's part of our role, is just to let them know that that's not true. And what does the father do? He goes against all custom. The father was the patriarch. He was there. People came to him. What does he do? He starts running toward his son. Unheard of. But that also reflects to us who God is. And gives him all those things to restore him. Shoes, because slaves didn't wear shoes. The son was just happy to come back and be a servant so he could feed his belly. But he says, absolutely not. You're a son, you're not a slave. And the ring and the robe. So he's come back to life. So he has experienced mercy. In the 8th, we have the cure of the paralytic. And we see that in this particular panel, the paralytic is he's in the process of getting up, being healed. It's thought that since this took place in Capernaum, that maybe this was at Peter's house also. That poor mother-in-law who had to probably sweep up all the stuff when they came to the roof, But of course, the Jews had such a sense of this physical illness had to stem from some personal sin of the man or of his parents, but of course we would say it's a result of original sin, because things are never quite right because of that we carry within us. So I think it's probably pretty important, especially during the Holy Year, and if it's in Peter's house or the Basilica of St. Peter, that we welcome people with healing, whether it's physical healing, but sometimes the greatest healing of all is that of the spirit and the mind and the heart. What else do I want to say about that one? Jesus tells him to pick up his mat or his stretcher and to go back home, where he is to also announce, You know the good news there. Number 9. Her sins, many as they are, have been forgiven her. So this was the woman who was at the home of Simon the Pharisee, and she's washing Jesus' feet with her tears and putting ointment upon them. Maybe she'd met Jesus before. Maybe she had seen that he had treated sinners with such care. Look at Simon the Pharisee in the back. He's got his finger up to his mouth thinking, yeah, right, yeah, who does he think he is? I know who she is, and doesn't he know better, and blah, blah, blah. But St. Augustine says in one of his writings that Jesus heard Simon's thoughts. And then Jesus tells the story about the 2 men who are in debt. One owes a big sum, one a lesser sum. And which one's going to be most grateful? Well, the one who had the bigger sum remitted, obviously. And he talks about this woman and says, look at her, she's done everything. She's used her money, she's washed my feet. You didn't even give me a kiss when I came into the house. And here she is acting like the servant. She's crying for her tears. So it's her faith that saves her. And so sometimes it's much easier for the hardened sinner, for the person that's been so enmeshed in sin, maybe to convert than somebody who's full of their own righteousness, And oftentimes that describes church people, Hate to say it, talk to myself first, Panel 10 is the need for forgiveness, and this is when Peter really thinks he's being big. Lord, how many times should I forgive somebody? 7 times? Well, if somebody in Jewish tradition, if they had offended you, done the same thing to you, same sin 3 times, you could forgive them 3 times, but not a 4th, So Peter doubles it and adds 1, thinking, boy, Jesus is going to pat me on the back, thinking I'm great. He says, no, not 7. The previous translation of the English translation was 70 times 7 times, which was 490. And this says, the new one says 77. But I think in fairness, Jesus is not talking about arithmetic. He's just trying to tell us, you listen, you got to keep doing it. You just have to keep forgiving over and over. And we can get so mad at somebody else who's hurt us again and again and again, and yet we go and expect to be forgiven because we do the same old things over and over again and again. So kind of reminds me of I used a story in my Easter homily about there was a case in Paducah in which a man was up for murder, and he had killed a woman 30 years before, and just randomly followed her and went to her house and assaulted her and then killed her, and had been on the loose. They never had solved the case for years until I think he was arrested for something else, and then it kind of came out that he had done this. And so he was in court, and there was a trial about what to do. And the woman who had been killed, her sister was there. Joyce was there, and she said, I looked at him and listened to him, and he didn't seem to have, he said he was sorry, but he didn't have any remorse in his voice. And she said, but you know what, I don't hate him. She says, I don't like to carry hate in my heart. She says, but I do know that unless I forgive him, God's not going to forgive me. And I just thought, what a faith-filled woman, and how hard, of course, it is to forgive somebody who's taken one of your dearest people in your life away from you. But that's kind of what Jesus is saying too, and especially in some of those parables, and in the Lord's Prayer, forgive us as we forgive those who wrong us. So, anyway, that's too much of a sermon on that particular gospel. But Peter thought he was being big-hearted. Jesus says, nope, you got to be really big-hearted. The 11th is the denial of Peter. We see the rooster up on the top of that panel. Look at Jesus' hands. They're bound together, and Peter is crying. Of course, we know the story, but in that passage from Luke 22, verse 61, Jesus passes by. As they're taking Jesus off, he sees Peter. And it says he looks straight into his eyes. So, yeah, he passed Peter, looked into his eyes, but not with eyes of accusation. But memory, I'm sure, struck Peter over and over. Pope Leo the Great once wrote this. Peter was destined to be the pastor of the church, and he had to learn mercy for others through his own sin. God first allowed Peter to know himself and then made him a leader, so that through his own weakness he learned to feel compassion for the weakness of others. And indeed, I do find that people that are most compassionate are those who've done some wrong things themselves and who know the power of mercy. So we see Christ's hands, as I mentioned, they're roped together, but his imprisonment frees us from the fetters of sin. According to tradition, at least one tradition, Peter would wake up at cockscrow and weep over the denial of Christ, which was always alive in his memory. And the cock that's shown in the picture at the top of the panel, there's a morning hymn by St. Ambrose. It's the hymn for lauds on Sunday. It says, "The vigilant cock crows already in the deep of the night. Peter, hearing him, weeps bitter tears." St. Ambrose wrote that in Latin, but anyway, those are the words. The 12th panel is the crucifixion, and we see the thieves on either side of Jesus. Jesus is looking at traditionally the one we call Dismas, the good thief, and then Justus is the name for the bad thief, or the traditional name for the bad thief, who's actually not looking at Jesus, but Dismas is. And what does he ask? He asks that Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. He's assuming at the end of time, remember me, Jesus. And Jesus answers, what do you mean? Today. This is the day you'll be with me in paradise. So it's a request that's answered to a superlative degree. You'll be with me today. You know, there's another old legend. I think it's in an Arabic infancy narrative, which I probably told at church, but it's about the Holy Family in the flight to Egypt, and they're accosted by two young thieves who happen to be Dismas and Justus. And Justus wants to rob the Holy Family and hurt them, and Dismas sees something good in this little family. He can't name it, but he promises to pay off Justus. He said, I'll pay you 30 pieces of silver if you would just leave them alone. So that's in the Arabic infancy narrative. But Mary supposedly tells them, I will see you again and you will know God's mercy. So some of those stories might be fanciful, but they're kind of beautiful too. Let's see. Then we have the appearance to Thomas. Of course, we just had that on Sunday, so I'm sure y'all had a wonderful explanation about Christ allowing Peter to put his finger into the nail marks of his hands and his whole hand into his side. St. Gregory the Great wrote this, God's infinite mercy provided that this disciple's need to touch the Master's wounds also heal the wounds of our own incredulity. The answer to Thomas's doubts is more convincing than the faith of believers, because he only believes after receiving direct proof, so our minds can overcome every uncertainty, confirming our faith. I don't know about you all, but the sister that taught me in second grade, preparing me for first sacraments, always said when the priest holds up the host in the words of consecration, you say, my Lord and my God, to yourself. That those were the words of St. Thomas, and those need to be your words too, because you believe that. So I still say that today because it's the Lord who's doing it, and I acknowledge him as my Lord and God. So Thomas is an example for us of belief. But then Jesus says, blessed are those who have not seen, but have believed. The 14th panel is Christ appearing to his disciples. Actually, that should probably be reversed, but I'm not really sure how that happened. It has it listed in one of my guides as the 14th panel. But we see the risen Lord, and his gifts to his apostles are what? Peace and joy. His first Easter gifts. They're full of fear. So what does he say first? Peace be with you. Then he says, as the Father sent me, so I'm sending you. So he's telling them to go out. He's commissioning them. And then thirdly, the third gift, he says, receive the Holy Spirit. He breathes on them. And that kind of brings to mind what God did on the waters of chaos in Genesis, of bringing order out of chaos and bringing life to those waters on the earth. And then the ability to forgive sin. So his apostles are in rapt attention of Jesus. As he says, receive the Holy Spirit. The 15th panel on the holier doors is the miraculous appearance of Jesus to Saul of Tarsus as he's going to round up Christians. Of course, we see the horse there. I'm always reminded of Bishop Seneca several weeks after of ordination, priesthood ordination. I remember Kevin Carl and John Meredith and myself meeting with Bishop Seneca so he could give us, our assignments. And I think we also signed a note there to pay off some of our seminary fees. But anyway, but we were ordained in January, and he was going to assign us on January 25th, which is the feast of the conversion of St. Paul. And Bishop Seneca was a good man and a holy man, but kind of nervous. He had a rubber band he was kind of playing with, and he said, and just as St. Paul was knocked off the horse and he was converted, and Kevin Carl says, excuse me, Bishop Seneca, the scripture doesn't say anything about a horse being there, which I thought was a little branch, and the rubber band goes flying off to the ends of the earth, so every time I see that horse, that's in our mind. Most paintings of Paul's conversion, we see that, but the scripture doesn't mention a horse. So I just say that as something that has nothing to do with anything else. So anyway, but we know what that conversion did, and it says something to us. Paul was not indifferent. He was, like they say in Revelation, he's hot or cold. He's not in the middle. And I think sometimes little can be done against indifference, but maybe a passionate unbeliever really offers God an opportunity and a challenge, but an opportunity, I think. So the resurrected Christ saw that in Saul, and he saw his potential. He saw what he could do. And Paul did change. He's the one who brought so many Gentiles into the church. And a lot of our own theology comes from Paul's reflections while he was in prison, and some of his practical things about guiding churches. But he reflected on Jesus, whom he was persecuting, which reminds us that when we hurt other people, it takes us all back to Matthew 25. Reach out, and this is the year of mercy, and especially of concentrating on spiritual and corporal works of mercy, that we perform them because we are doing them to Christ. The last one is an actual panel of the Pope Pius XII, who's opening and knocking on that brand new Holy Year door for the first time. What do I want to say? This is what Pope Pius XII said about that Holy Year of 1950. We must have that same spirit of piety which in past centuries inspired the faithful to overcome every kind of difficulty and come to Rome, often on foot, to cleanse their sins and tears of grief, imploring God's forgiveness and God's peace. So that door is full of meaning, and they should remember that as the pilgrims cross the threshold. Going through that door stands for conversion, which is sincere when there's an inner change in the person's heart. And through conversion, we understand more deeply the great love that God has for us. And we will return to him. That door stands for mercy. On the other side awaits a loving Father who's ready to welcome us back and forgive us. Stands for justice. It stands for sanctity. That's part of our conversion process.